I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today. And what he did is an incredible offer. He offered to have the people working on the case come and work with their investigators with respect to the 12 people. I think that's an incredible offer. Okay, thank you. Yes, Dick.
Позвольте мне добавить два слова.
I'd like to add something to
Я
this.
тоже работал в разведке.
After all, I was an intelligence officer myself,
И знаю, как составляются соответствующие досье.
and I do know how dossiers are made up.
Just a minute.
Maybe I'll say something good. Okay.
It's a very long, complicated story.
Here's what I think happened to the United States in the past 8 years.
First of all, that sounds like a very incendiary allegation.
It was the
Well,
President
that the
Trump,
president committed
who
the
made
crime.
that
The president
accusation.
He ended up polarizing the country in a way that brings us close to fascism.
You really need to dig into what's happened to Lieutenant General Flynn. Apparently, there's a lot been going on inside the FBI. Look at Andrew McCabe, focus on some of these characters.
And in accompanying that, trains Republicans to just hate rule of law.
So let's walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. I want to thank you all. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you all for being in.
You have to spin up the ball of thread before you can tell the story.
Thank you.
So I'm going to talk about the Mueller Report and why I think everyone still needs to understand how the two parts work. The second part pertains to Trump's obstruction. To understand how Mueller wanted things to proceed when he finished, you need to understand that Volume 2 was meant to go to the House, lead to an impeachment, so that you can get to something on Volume 1. Volume 1 is what the report was supposed to be. Volume 1 is the prosecutions and declinations. In 4 sections, Mueller describes what he investigated, who he charged, who he didn't charge. Then there's referrals that come out of there, which we'll talk about. But the really important thing to know is he makes what are called declinations in there. He describes a number of people like Don Jr. that he chose not to charge. And as we'll talk about later, how he does the declinations is also important for understanding where he wanted the investigation to go.
There were multiple systematic efforts to interfere in our election.
So these are my suspicions, right? This is what I understand to have happened.
And that allegation deserves the attention of every American. Thank you. Thank you for being here today.
Remember, we started with Crossfire Hurricane.
Jumpin' Jack Flash was running through my mind.
That was started July, August of 2016. That didn't advance very far, except against Carter Page.
Let's not jump to any conclusions.
Partly because of the election. Not doing much until Vladimir Putin doesn't do anything in response to Obama sanctions.
Trump wrote, "Great move on delay by V. Putin. I always knew he was very smart."
And then they look and they find out that Mike Flynn has been speaking to Putin's ambassador.
You follow me, ambassador?
And that leads to some public attention in the beginning of 2017 that the FBI then uses as a predicate to start more actively investigating George Papadopoulos. They had been using informants, but now they start interviewing him.
A Maltese man named Joseph Mifsud told me this information. Okay. You should look into him.
To also start investigating Mike Flynn, the famous January 2017 interview.
The strangest thing happened.
It's still fairly slow. They did not get George Papadopoulos until after they interviewed him for the first time. So they didn't, for example, know that he was speaking to this guy named Ivan Timofev.
A program director of the 2 most prestigious think tanks in Russia.
They didn't get national security letters on Mike Flynn until after that interview, until after he lied. And my suspicion is they discovered that in his calls with the Russian ambassador during the transition period, they discovered that Trump was more closely involved in that.
Flynn says, listen, a couple things. Number one, what would I ask you guys to do and make sure that you can convey this, okay? Do not allow this administration to box us in right now, okay?
But they did not end up using that in the investigation for probably reasonable reasons. In other words, they didn't want to infringe too much on Donald Trump. They didn't expect they were going to be able to use the FISA intercepts from the ambassador. And so those kinds of decisions influence the case in ways that I don't think people appreciate. Then after the FBI continues to investigate Mike Flynn.
As a former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Flynn knew his conversations with the Russian ambassador would be monitored.
So it's the damnedest thing. He knew you knew, but he's still denying it.
I can't explain it.
After Flynn's fired, that's when things go haywire.
The FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election.
Trump eventually fires Jim Comey.
I was confident in May of 2017 that we had ample facts to indicate that the president may have committed obstruction of justice.
And in that week is when Rod Rosenstein, who, as we said, should have recused.
It was also said at a previous time that the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, offered to wear a wire into the White House to record potentially incriminating conversations with the president. A statement was released after that was never serious, it was sarcastic, etc. McCabe, in our interview, says no. It came up more than once, and it was so serious that he took it to the lawyers at the FBI to discuss it.
Rod Rosenstein decides he's going to bring in a special counsel and picks Robert Mueller.
The choice of Robert Mueller for special counsel has been met with unusual universal praise from both sides of the aisle.
I think he's a person of great integrity.
He'll be above politics. You will not push him around.
Completely unimpeachable in all respects. He will investigate the matter and follow the facts wherever they may lead.
From decorated war hero to crusading prosecutor to unyielding FBI director, this is how Robert Mueller came to be considered the least biased man in America.
Rosenstein considered some far more partisan people. So it's possible, even from the start, he had the intent of making this a whitewash.
I agree with that general statement.
But nevertheless, he brings in Mueller. Mueller brings in a bunch of other people.
And the team Mueller has assembled may be the A-team of prosecutors for an entire generation.
And they set up this investigation so that there's a sizable team investigating whether Trump was trying to obstruct the investigation into Russia.
And then we learn in the midst of all of this that Trump asked Comey, according to news reports, to stop the investigation of General Flynn, which is kind of the definition of what obstruction of justice is about. Yesterday, we learned that he sat down and revealed classified information to the Russians who are supporting Assad in Syria.
There's the Andrew Weissman team, who famously is focused on Paul Manafort. There was a pre-existing money laundering case against him in the FARA investigation. And what Weissman did, and I think it was a poor decision on his part for all this squawking about January 6th, Weissman basically focused on that pre-existing investigation, brought it to an indictment in fall of 2017. So fairly quickly.
Robert Mueller's prosecutors say Manafort and his business partner and right-hand man in the campaign, Rick Gates, earned more than $75 million from 2006 to 2015 lobbying for Viktor Yanukovych, the former president of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin's man in that position, but put the money in banks on island nations outside the U.S. to hide it from the government.
And then used it to try and flip both Gates and Manafort. They both did ultimately enter into cooperation agreements. Gates's cooperation was useful.
On the stand, Gates admitted that at Manafort's direction, he falsified tax returns, hid millions of dollars from Ukrainian operatives, failed to report foreign bank accounts, and failed to register Manafort as a foreign agent. Gates also admitted that while he helped Manafort commit these crimes, he also embezzled from him.
Manafort's cooperation was not, and he's designed it not to be useful.
Manafort's lawyer also allegedly passed information to President Trump's legal team.
But I think as a result of that, they didn't look at some things that Konstantin Kilimnik was doing till late in the game.
Gates gave Kilimnik internal polling in 2016 on battleground states. I mean, that an American Trump campaign official gave it to a Russian Ukrainian official. What do you think that was all about? What for?
So in addition to that, Christian, that was repeatedly given.
They might have gotten further if they had taken a different approach there.
In the book, I tell the story of our issuing a grand jury subpoena to Deutsche Bank. It turned out that that grand jury subpoena was for Paul Manafort, but the White House got wind of the fact that we issued that grand jury subpoena and called up and demanded to know whether we were doing a financial investigation of the president. That was a red line. And at that early stage in the investigation, where there was this sort of Damocles over us as to whether we were going to be fired from one day to the next, the decision was made better to let the investigation go forward and put the financial investigation on hold. The issue I have is that that decision was not revisited, and that we really should have done the financial investigation.
So you've got the obstruction team, you've got the Manafort team, you've got a team investigating what we now know was a suspected payment via an Egyptian bank. The Washington Post recently significantly expanded the coverage of this.
The cash weighed about 200 pounds when it was withdrawn from a state-run bank in Cairo at the request of an organization linked to the Egyptian intelligence service just 5 days before Trump took office as president in 2017. The Post reports Trump earlier gave the same amount to his own campaign, and investigators suspected Trump expected to be repaid by Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi.
It's unclear whether that was a payment directly from Egypt or whether Egypt was a pass-through. So, but in any case, they suspect that $10 million comes into Trump and he invests money in his campaign in September or October of 2016. And then the last team is Jeannie Rhee's team, which is about Russia.
Russia seized Crimea without firing a shot. Putin had successfully used disinformation and weaponized leaks. He was also testing something else: Russia's cyber capabilities.
There is a cheap way to intimidate other countries. What Putin has are armies of people at laptops harassing, intimidating, and even manipulating the information and news that we read.
But sort of as a side note of the investigation, in June and July of 2017, as they're just beginning the investigation, first Jeannie Rhee and then Andrew Weissman go to the FBI and say, okay, give us what you've got on the hack and leak. And when they did, DOJ basically wasn't investigating it that aggressively.
The first intrusion into the DNC, these were initially detected by the NSA, who shares the information with the FBI. And those intrusions, first intrusions in 2015, were by the group known as APT-29 or Cozy Bear.
APT-29 was already known to American investigators. Cozy Bear were Russian hackers.
There was a pattern in terms of the tools used, in terms of the nature of the probing that they saw, that pointed back to Russia pretty early on.
But inside FBI headquarters, the reaction was surprisingly low-key.
And so I think that's one of the reasons why the hack and leak was brought under Mueller as well. And technically that was under Jeannie Rhee. We don't know much about that investigation because the files on it were not unsealed. But you've got additional prosecutors who are sort of more closely tied to the hack and leak and the influence operation.
Good afternoon. A grand jury in the District of Columbia today returned an indictment presented by the Special Counsel's Office. The indictment charges 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian companies for committing federal crimes while seeking to interfere in the United States political system, including the 2016 presidential election. The defendants allegedly conducted what they called information warfare against the United States.
What Jeannie Rhee is primarily investigating is all of the Russians trying to influence the campaign, whether it's Guccifer 2.0, whether it's Petroven, the Alpha Bank guy, whether it's the Agalarovs who set up the June 9th meeting.
Trump's willingness to exploit the situation, to use all these emails, really compound the impact. I mean, Russia couldn't have envisioned that it would have a candidate willing to do that.
You've got the 4 existing investigations. By July of 2017, they've already arrested George Papadopoulos because he lied about being approached, about getting advance notice of the email campaign.
Why all the lies?
So he's arrested. We don't learn about that until October. They're trying to get him to cooperate. And he doesn't cooperate. There's a moment, I think it's in September of 2017, where they show him his notes.
I explained to them that I come from a think tank background and I worked in the energy industry, but I do have a connection that can establish a potential summit between candidate Trump and President Putin.
They show him where he described setting up a meeting with Putin's people in London in September of 2016 with the guy, by the way, who's believed to be central to the Egyptian payment. And they say, what are these notes about? And he's, oh, I can't read my own handwriting. So he refuses to tell them what that's about. At one interview, he says, oh, I told my boss on the campaign about the email stuff.
John Mashburn, who was working on the campaign, testified that you sent an email to him talking about this.
If I have no recollection of doing that, George.
And then the next day, oh, I unforget that. I don't remember that. So Papadopoulos, they thought maybe they could flip him. No, he doesn't cooperate. Carter Page, they give up on because at that point, he's no longer part of the campaign.
This is a real game changer if it turns out to be true.
They did find some interesting things, but we talked about this with the dossier. If you believe the dossier is disinformation, they say Carter Page is the big liaison.
I do know how dossiers are made up.
That distracts from Konstantin Kalimnik, who really is.
They needed a fucking Russian.
Yeah.
I happen to be that fucking Russian.
And as I said, they pulled together the existing investigation into Manafort and Gates. They indict that in October of 2017. By February, Rick Gates believes that he's not going to get a pardon, so he flips. And his cooperation is inconsistent and it builds, so it takes him a while to be reliable. And then after Barr is hired, he starts becoming unreliable. They suspect he's leaking parts of his testimony.
Gates also complimented his former boss, saying that Manafort is probably one of the most politically brilliant strategists I've ever worked with.
Paul Manafort entered into a cooperation agreement on September 13th of 2018, so right before the elections. He's already guilty on his tax charges in EDVA, but he enters into this cooperation agreement in September of 28, preventing a trial about how he is an influence peddler for Russian oligarchs.
Mr. Mayor, good to see you. On the Manafort issue, I have been told by numerous and multiple sources close to Manafort and others that, in fact, whatever cooperation is going to take place is not what is being reported. It would have nothing to do with the campaign, Donald Trump, Russia, collusion of any kind, but more to do with lobbying and other groups.
Well, Sean, that's absolutely true. I mean, the reality is there was a quote put out by a source close to Manafort that the plea agreement has and the cooperation agreement has nothing to do with the Trump campaign. Quote, there is no evidence of collusion.
This was the money laundering and FARA tied to Yulia Tymoshenko, tied to pushing Russian policy through this front organization he had with a bunch of high-ranking Europeans. And so he ultimately was found to have lied about 3 of the topics that were central to his cooperation, about what he was doing with Konstantin Kalimnik on August 2nd, 2016, this quid pro quo, this seeming quid pro quo, help on the campaign, strategy on the campaign, carve up Ukraine, millions of dollars. He lied about what we now know is the hush payment investigation.
The president used his pardon power during the investigation in order to thwart cooperation. In other words, for people who were thinking they should cooperate with us because otherwise they might spend a long time in jail, this president was saying, not so fast, because if you hold fast and you don't do what Michael Cohen did, you'll get a pardon.
Those are 3 of the 4 investigations that were part of Crossfire Hurricane. With Mike Flynn, they also investigated his Turkish influence peddling.
We do not need a reckless president who believes she is above the law. Lock her up. That's right. That's right. Lock her up.
Remember that after the convention in 2016, Turkey offered him basically $500,000 for what ended up being an op-ed that was published right after the election. There were discussions about kidnapping Gulen,
Outrageous and false. The reaction of Michael Flynn's lawyer to reports suggesting the former US National Security Advisor may have been involved in an alleged plan to seize a Muslim cleric and deliver him to Turkey. Fethullah Gulen, who lives in self-imposed exile in Pennsylvania, is accused of orchestrating last year's failed coup in Turkey by the country's government. US Special Counsel Robert Mueller is probing claims Flynn met senior Turkish officials before President Trump's inauguration and was offered some $15 million to get Gulen back to Turkey.
It was an effort, as soon as it became clear that he had access to Donald Trump, to buy that access to Donald Trump. And he did not register it properly. He basically lied to his lawyers about what the relationship with the government of Turkey was. And so as they were investigating why he lied about sanctions, why he was speaking to the Russian ambassador during the transition period, they also were investigating this Turkish stuff, and they were using that as leverage. So they said, we could prosecute you for the FARA crimes, for the Turkish FARA crimes. That could be up to 15 years of prison. Can we flip you to talk about those conversations with the Russian ambassador in the transition period? And so that's how he enters into a cooperation agreement in November 2017.
Once inside, a federal judge asked him if he was doing so willingly and voluntarily. The 58-year-old former lieutenant general answered with a simple, yes, sir.
His cooperation, like everyone else's, was he provided some useful information, but by May of 2018, he is already working with Barbara Ladine, who is Chuck Grassley's top aide on the Judiciary Committee.
Barbara Ladine, longtime, well-known conservative activist. She's married, incidentally, to Michael Ladine, who last year wrote a book with Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn.
And he's already undermining the investigation even as he's cooperating about it. Two things that it's important to know about the investigation into Mike Flynn is, in August of 2017, Mueller got the devices that the Trump campaign used during the transition period. And Trump believed that he had prevented that from happening. Trump believed that he had withheld key details. And so Katie McFarland, who, remember, ended up being the deputy national security advisor.
He relayed to the ambassador that the Trump team did not want Russia to escalate the situation. Flynn made that call after consulting with someone court papers identify as a senior transition official. CBS News has learned that was Flynn's deputy, Katie McFarland.
Katie McFarland is interviewed in that period, and she admits to undermining Egypt's attempt to sanction Israel, which was actually one of the lies that Flynn admitted to.
Come unannounced, in his case to the White House, and in my case to my house. And when they arrive, they didn't warn me about anything, but the first thing out of my mouth was, do I need a lawyer for anything? Am I under some kind of investigation? And they said, oh, well, we can't tell you not to get a lawyer, but we're here just to get some information about what the Russians might have done. Well, Sandra, I'm a Girl Scout, and I wanted to know what the Russians did during the election as much as anybody else.
But she didn't admit to a bunch of other things, and then copped on after a while that DOJ had gotten those devices from the transition period. After Flynn's cooperation became public, she immediately tries to clean up her testimony, tries to confess to things that she hadn't confessed to before. And that saved her, and the FBI agent that I talked about, Bill Barnett, saved her from being charged with false statements as well. So she and Flynn were telling the same coordinated story. He flips, she ends up cleaning up her statement, and that's where you end up.
I can tell you, President Trump has reassured me several times that this is not going to go away, that he's determined to find out what really happened and went on and to hold people accountable.
There was also an investigation into J.D. Gordon. He's not important, except he's the guy who prevented the platform from becoming more Ukraine.
Well, if I just got off the phone with J.D. Gordon, who served as a national security advisor to the Trump campaign before the election. He's no longer with Donald Trump or the administration at this point. But he does tell me, Wolf, that over the summer at the Republican convention in Cleveland, that he did have a conversation with the Russian ambassador as well as other national security advisors for President, then candidate Trump at the time. Carter Page and Walid Phares. And then Gordon says that he was a part of the effort that was pushed by the Trump campaign to put some language in the GOP platform that essentially said that the Republican Party did not advocate for arming the Ukrainians in their battle against those pro-Russian separatists. They were successful in having that language in the Republican Party platform. And I asked J.D. Gordon, why did you go ahead and advocate for that language? And he said that this is the language that Donald Trump himself wanted.
So Gordon was investigated. He had ties to the ambassador. Maria Butina went to a rock concert with him.
The two exchanged several emails in September and October 2016, culminating in an invitation from Gordon to attend a concert by the rock band Styx in Washington. I can't make that up. Gordon also invited Butina to attend his birthday party in late October of that year.
There are people that the declination is not public, people like Eric Prince and Steve Bannon, but there is a public declination for him, and there's also a public declination for Don Jr. And Don Jr. was investigated for a couple things. One is WikiLeaks tried to cultivate him. Everyone Russian tried to cultivate him. He's dumb, so he's an obvious target, right?
I don't know whether to be like upset or impressed.
And WikiLeaks tried to cultivate him. Maria Butina did. The Agalarovs did. Everyone, Don Jr. is the soft underbelly of Donald Trump. And WikiLeaks sent him a link to a non-public site and said, hey, this could help your dad. This is at a time, by the way, when Don Jr. is part of these right-wing troll rooms. And there's a figure in the right-wing troll rooms that I suspect is him, where WikiLeaks is introducing stuff to the troll rooms through Don Jr. But WikiLeaks sends Don Jr. this link.
Trump Jr. received the password from WikiLeaks and then wrote to others that, quote, it worked when he tried it. That evidence would support a conclusion that he accessed a computer without authorization.
Mueller assessed whether that amounted to a violation of the hacking statute. And it would be a misdemeanor. It's stupid to charge him. So that is a declination. It took Jason Leopold like pulling teeth to actually liberate, but he did liberate. And then he was also investigated for the June 9th meeting. And Mueller's declination there ultimately was he was too stupid to know that you can't accept help from Russian oligarchs to win an election.
Mr. Trump had frequently told me and others that his son Don Jr. had the worst judgment of anyone in the world.
But they spent a lot of 2017 as interviews with all of the people who were at that meeting, to understand it. I mentioned before that Mueller knew that Donald Trump had coordinated his story with Vladimir Putin, but that didn't make it into the report.
About halfway through the dinner, Trump gets up, goes around the table, sits down next to Putin, and begins this conversation. Everyone that was there, this was in full view of all of these heads of state and their spouses. And it was very animated. It was extremely friendly. There was certainly a lot of hand motion going on between the two leaders, the two presidents.
That's the kind of thing that should have been an impeachment inquiry rather than a criminal inquiry. And then there's the investigation into Michael Cohen and Roger Stone. And those were later. Those start under Mueller. The Michael Cohen investigation starts from some suspicious activity reports that he immediately after the inauguration, he starts getting huge chunks of money from Viktor Vekselberg, who is the Russian oligarch, who's still part of this investigation.
The allegation is that from October 2016 until January 2018, Mr. Cohen used his bank account here for over $4 million in transactions, including $500,000 traced to Mr. Viktor Vekselberg, this oligarch. And that it says that Mr. Vekselberg and his cousin, a man named Mr. Andrew Intrater, routed these payments.
His cousin has ties to George Santos.
There's no secrets in this place. It's amazing how you all know what goes on.
So he's getting this money from Russian oligarchs. It happens to be the same bank account he uses for the hush payment to Stormy Daniels. He has lied to his bank about why he's using that bank account. And that investigation then discovers that he hasn't paid taxes on his taxi medallions.
The crimes involved here are numerous. I mean, this could prove the conspiracy between the campaign and the Russians with respect to the...
You see this as potential collusion evidence?
Oh, I think it's conspiracy evidence for both the conspiracy to steal the emails and distribute them to help Trump get elected as president, as well as the conspiracy relating to Facebook and the use of social media to suppress the Clinton vote.
The Vexelberg stuff turned out to not be that interesting because Michael Cohen wasn't formally lobbying. But over time, in part, and this is one of my favorite parts about the Mueller investigation, they got at least Cohen's, and I suspect also Don Jr.'s emails, Trump Organization emails from Microsoft, right? That's how they discovered the emails with Michael Cohen setting up a discussion with Dmitry Peskov's office in January of 2016, showing that he was pursuing this Trump Tower deal.
Cohen said he lied when he told Congress that the dealings with Russia ended in January 2016, before the presidential campaign was heating up. In fact, he admitted they continued for at least another 6 months, and he briefed Trump family members. He also lied to Congress when he said he was not in touch with any Russian officials about the project and had no plans to travel there. Cohen now says he emailed Dmitry Peskov, one of Vladimir Putin's closest aides, trying to get the Russian government's help with the project, and talked on the phone with one of Peskov's aides for 20 minutes.
Felix Sater had old ties to Andrew Weissman and a couple other people on the team, and I think both Sater and Cohen were lying at first, and then over time, Sater started telling the truth about what had happened as they got more evidence of it.
And they said Mr. Sater said he was eager to show video clips to his Russian contacts of instances of Mr. Trump speaking glowingly about Russia, and said he would arrange for Mr. Putin to praise Mr. Trump's business acumen. If he says it, we own this election, Mr. Sater wrote. You wrote that.
I did write that, yes.
Why in these emails, there's two of them here,
right?
Why are you guys making this connection between building this building in Russia and his electoral success?
Me personally, I was trying to build the tallest building in the world or in Europe.
Michael Cohen, ultimately, after he pled guilty to the SDNY stuff, went to Mueller basically as revenge, I think, and flipped and told some of the truth about that Trump Tower story.
Robert Mueller, in his investigation, has uncovered two separate criminal conspiracies that aided Donald Trump's election in 2016. One was run by the Russian government, involving the hacking attacks on the DNC and information operations on Facebook and Twitter. And the other was a criminal conspiracy around campaign finance violations led by Michael Cohen himself. Today, what this guilty plea means is that the central figure in one of those criminal conspiracies reached out to and sought the aid of the central figure, Vladimir Putin, in the other criminal conspiracies.
So that investigation is interesting from a bureaucratic approach. It's interesting because Rosenstein changed the rules, and it may have undermined Mueller's ability to get Michael Cohen's cooperation at all. I think I'm the only one who recognizes that it's a change. It's probably somebody in Rod Rosenstein's office. I think it actually happens before Ed O'Callaghan comes in.
Good afternoon. My name is Ed O'Callaghan, and I am the Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Justice Department's National Security Division.
But this PAYDAG was the one supervising Mueller. When it started, Rob Hur was that PAYDAG. And Rob Hur, we've seen problems in the Biden investigation.
You chose a general pejorative reference to the president. You understood when you made that decision, didn't you, Mr. Hur, that you would ignite a political firestorm with that language, didn't you?
Congressman, politics played no part whatsoever in my investigative steps.
Rob Hur was personally, centrally involved in the firing of Andy McCabe in early 2018. And subsequently, DOJ came to the conclusion that process deprived Andy McCabe of his due process. And so Rob Hur is not entirely without fault. Rob Hur should never have been picked for the investigation into Joe Biden because he could be pressured in these ways. But he was a longtime respected prosecutor. The guy who replaced him is Ed O'Callaghan. And people who have followed politics for a while will remember that Ed O'Callaghan was Sarah Palin's babysitter when she was John McCain's VP candidate.
It's very interesting. You quoted before Ed O'Callaghan, who was who merged yesterday for the first time publicly. as a spokesman for the McCain campaign in Alaska. He's actually a lot more than that. And we report on this tonight on Newsweek.com. He is a former Justice Department prosecutor, top guy. He was, until very recently, the chief of Terrorism and National Security Unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York. He left the Justice Department at the end of July and was flown to Alaska as part of a McCain campaign rapid response team to deal with the Troopergate investigation.
So fundamentally different kind of person overseeing Mueller. And that changes in April 2018.
This new report details attempts by Rosenstein to keep his job in the wake of a news account that suggested he was willing to wear a wire to secretly record Donald Trump. Rosenstein telling the president he would make sure Trump was treated fairly by Mueller. Quote, "This is Rosenstein now. I give the investigation credibility," Rosenstein said, in the words of one administration official offering their own characterization of the call. Quote, "I can land the plane."
They also send off investigations into Manafort's associates, right? People like Tony Podesta, the Republican lobbying company that was also involved in his influence peddling, Greg Craig. Those all get sent off to other places. George Nader, remember?
The Lebanese-American businessman's ties to the United Arab Emirates are well known. But according to a New York Times report, Nader also has previously undisclosed ties to Russia.
George Nader is this guy who was working closely for the Emiratis, and he was pitching Trump. He was pitching Hillary Clinton as well. He was generally pitching stuff for the Emiratis, but he was pitching social media stuff to Trump. And then in the transition period, George Nader was crucially involved in setting up a meeting between a Russian oligarch who has ties to the Emiratis and Eric Prince in the Seychelles.
It's a remote luxury archipelago off the coast of East Africa known as a haven for offshore banking. The participants, the founder of the private military firm Blackwater, a Russian fund manager, and officials from the United Arab Emirates. And now the story is deepening with news that Blackwater's Eric Prince, a Trump associate and brother of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, may have withheld the truth about who else was at that meeting. George Nader, a Lebanese-American businessman and Middle East specialist with ties to the Trump team.
So all of these outreaches from the Russian government are through these back channels. And this is one where Flynn doesn't go himself. He sends Eric Prince. And George Nader was the one who busted that. Interestingly, he cooperates for a bit with Mueller, and then he leaves the country. And in the process of seizing Felix Sater's phone, they discover all this child sexual abuse material on the phone. And so the next time he comes into the country, he's busted for that.
He was transporting images of children involved in graphic videos. Now, these charges were unsealed today, but they were initially made in April of 2018. That was after Nader had already been cooperating with Robert Mueller's team. He was a key witness in that investigation, cited in over 4 dozen footnotes in the report.
He may get out of prison in December. Some of the influence peddling cases that he's involved with haven't been finished because one of the guys is hiding in Latvia right now. But he will be released in December and is expected to return to the Emirates, where he'll abuse children again.
Now, these charges today are not the first time that Nader has been charged with transporting child pornography. He was also charged in 1991 and pleaded guilty then.
This is another investigation, ended up at EDVA because that's where he flew into with the child sexual abuse material on the phone. One of the things that happens is these downstream investigations get farmed out earlier than they did, and that leaves Mueller with fewer tools than he might otherwise have had.
I can land the plane.
Oh, let me say one thing before I do Roger Stone. Mueller has said this, and most people don't understand what it means. So you've got these 4 teams, and you've got the people who are doing the Russian hacking and the social media investigations, who are sort of a side part of the teams. They're formally under Mueller, but they're on their own. Mueller has said, we didn't do the counterintelligence part of the investigation. We had people from FBI involved in that, but that wasn't part of our investigation. And people don't understand the significance of that. There is a part of Mueller's interview in May of 2019 where he says this quite clearly. He's asked a question, I think it was from Raj Krishnamurthy, what about Flynn and counterintelligence?
Individuals can be subject to blackmail if they lie about their interactions with foreign countries, correct?
True.
For example, you successfully charged former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn of lying to federal agents about his conversations with Russian officials, correct?
Correct.
Since it was outside the purview of your investigation, your report did not address how Flynn's false statements could pose a national security risk because the Russians knew the falsity of those statements, right?
I cannot get into that mainly because there are many elements of the FBI that are looking at different aspects of that issue.
Currently.
And Mueller says, yeah, no, that stuff is still being investigated. One thing that happened was they flipped Mike Flynn in fall of 2017. They indict his partner, Bijan Kian, who is less involved in all of this than Mike Flynn.
Kian was a partner at Flynn's consulting firm. Court documents say Kian, quote, conspired covertly and unlawfully with the Turkish government to try to get Gülen extradited. Flynn isn't named in this indictment, but he already admitted to his involvement in his own guilty plea with special counsel Robert Mueller's office.
Mike Flynn is supposed to testify, and by the time it goes to trial, which is 2019, Flynn is already trying to overturn his cooperation. So Bijan Kian goes to trial in 2019, and right before trial, DOJ gives Bijan Kian's attorneys information that the counterintelligence discoveries about Turkey's attempts to cultivate Mike Flynn are far more extensive than what he had gotten in discovery.
Now we're learning from the McClatchy report that apparently, right around the early days, the first move to take the ISIS stronghold of Raqqa would be, using the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds. Right. And because Turkey apparently opposed that, and Flynn was getting paid by Turkey.
And because Turkey has real concerns about the arming of the Kurds, there's a huge dispute that's been going on there for generations.
But therefore, then President Trump opposed that move.
Right. Yes.
On the advice of Flynn.
That is our understanding of it.
So in other words, there's a story we know about Flynn's cooperation with Turkey in 2016. And then there's a whole bunch more that we don't know that's far more extensive. The efforts to cultivate him, his closeness with the Turks is far more than is public. And that's a testament to both that counterintelligence investigations are slower, they have a different purpose, and they were going on long after Mueller was done. Same with Konstantin Kilimnik. Konstantin Kilimnik was charged in the Manafort investigation based on his efforts to undermine the investigation in 2018. And then the FBI put a $200,000 reward for his arrest. But Konstantin Kilimnik has not been overtly charged, even though he's been sanctioned by Treasury for his role in influence peddling. They basically, in 2021, they came out and said, Konstantin Kilimnik is a Russian intelligence services agent, and he did share the strategy and the data that he got from Paul Manafort with other Russian spies.
In February, again, we saw the FBI suddenly slap a reward out there for any information leading to Konstantin Kilimnik's arrest. And now we know, as of today, that what was going on behind the scenes in the interim is that the intelligence community was concluding that Kilimnik was not only involved in the Russian government's interference to try to help Trump get into the White House in 2016, he was also a key part of their efforts this time around to interfere in our election in 2020 to try to get Trump reelected.
That doesn't happen until 2021. Now, maybe it doesn't happen until 2021 because it's not going to happen so long as Trump is president, but it's a testament to how long these counterintelligence investigations take. So after Mueller is done, you have 14 referrals. You have the ongoing investigation into the Egyptian bank. You have the ongoing prosecution and ongoing investigation into Roger Stone. And then you have things like an investigation. This is one of the referrals, investigation into Paul Manafort for how he used his super PAC to pay himself while he was working for free for Donald Trump. So that's the scope.
I mean, you ran SDNY. Have you ever finished a probe and handed off 12 other criminal referrals?
I don't think so. I'd have to think about that. That's a lot of referral. Look, there's a lot out there. So for people who think that people are exonerated here, I don't see any exoneration going on there. And there's still a lot out there that has not yet come to the public's eye with the referrals.
And I just want to emphasize to people that the counterintelligence side of this investigation was also separate in the same way that the hack and leak and stuff existed before and then existed after. By the way, one of the people who's talked about the hack and leak investigation existing before Mueller and after, just to show that this is all comes and goes, is Elvis Chan.
ELVISCHAN.
And he was involved in the hack and leak investigation before and then after. So, all right, Roger Stone.
Roger's, relationship with Trump has been so interconnected that it's hard to define what's Roger and what's Donald.
Oh, one more thing I want to say, which is super important. They never considered Rudy Giuliani one of the possible targets.
Oh, there's nothing wrong with taking information from Russians.
And that was stupid. And I think FBI now recognizes that was stupid. Rudy Giuliani, when Mike Flynn was interviewed and who else would have been reaching out to the Russians, he was asked. And he says, Rudy Giuliani's one. There were reasons, basically through his ties to Ukrainians, but there were reasons to investigate, to include Rudy Giuliani as a predicated target or a predicated subject of this investigation. He never was. And then somebody who should have been investigated becomes Donald Trump's lawyer in May of 2018. So he's off limits. Then he starts, and we'll get to this on the impeachment, then he starts working with Russian spies to get dirt on Hunter Biden.
Chief among the alleged Russian agents Rudy Giuliani was dealing with in Ukraine last December, this man, Andrei Derkach, named by the U.S. Treasury in September as a Russian agent and sanctioned for allegedly running an influence campaign against Biden. U.S. intelligence agencies were not spying on Giuliani, but on the people he was talking to in Ukraine, including Derkach.
So Rudy Giuliani should have been part of this investigation and was not.
You just said you wouldn't accept help from the Russians if you were
I don't know if I would or I wouldn't.
And so that's a gap in the investigation that I think was a real problem. So, Roger Stone.
Roger Stone. He stands out because he was not on staff in 2016 when Trump won the nomination and when that criminal hack occurred. But he's closer to Trump than most operatives. Stone famously began working for him all the way back in '88. He and his lobbying partner, Paul Manafort, advised Trump in business. Stone also helped Trump in 2000 when he flirted with a Reform Party bid. And he helped launch this Trump presidential campaign in 2015. News anchors were wondering who would help this man's long shot bid.
Roger Stone, maybe?
Roger always wanted me to run for president.
Will you remain with the Donald now throughout the campaign?
I'll do whatever the Donald asks me to do.
Stone now in the middle of intrigue in this probe, just as the self-promoting provocateur put himself in the middle of controversies from Nixon to Bush.
The Roger Stone investigation started when he blabbed his mouth to a right-wing outlet and said he had had contacts with Guccifer 2.0.
So, Roger, you don't believe what U.S. intelligence is saying about Guccifer?
Well, I'm uncertain. In any event, if I had unwitting contact with Guccifer 2, I have made the full content of that contact publicly available voluntarily. It is innocuous. And again, it's after the fact. It's ex post facto. In other words, the hacking of the DNC documents, the very crime that I am being accused by the smoking gun of being complicit in, had already taken place.
Roger Stone kept doing this. He kept trying to anticipate where the investigation in him would go and then blabbing something and then giving them cause to investigate.
Yeah, that's called networking.
So the first warrants against Roger Stone were for his Twitter account to corroborate precisely what he had said publicly, which is that he was talking to Guccifer 2.0 via DMs. They get his Twitter account, then they got his Hotmail, and then they get his Gmail. Then they go after, so this is in November of 2017, then they go after WikiLeaks and Assange's Twitter accounts to find out, because again, they've now discovered that Roger Stone is speaking to WikiLeaks, even though he is publicly denying that he's speaking to WikiLeaks.
On the same day, he sent an email claiming he had dinner with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Stone warned that, quote, devastating information from WikiLeaks would soon be released. Stone now says the email was sent in jest, that he never met or spoke with Julian Assange.
And at this phase of the investigation, they believed that I think they believed that WikiLeaks was Roger Stone's tie to the Russians, because he said so publicly, right? Because that was the obvious thing publicly. So they investigate a guy named Ted Malloch.
Ted Malloch was an informal advisor to the Donald Trump campaign. In March, he says he was detained at an airport by investigators for Robert Mueller, who took away his cell phone and asked about his ties to Roger Stone, among other things. He is also the author of the book, The Plot to Destroy Trump, How the Deep State Fabricated the Russian Dossier to Subvert the President.
Jerome Corsi. Roger Stone went to Jerome Corsi and said, Jerome Corsi, you need to get to WikiLeaks.
Step back just for our viewers. Explain who Jerome Corsi is. He's an author, a conspiracy theorist, one of the godfathers of the birther movement, and why he's significant to this Russia story.
Well, that's right. He created this myth that President Barack Obama was not born in the United States, and he maintains that to this day. And Corsi told me yesterday he would have been happy to get on a plane, fly to London, go to the Ecuadorian embassy to meet with Assange and hear exactly what he had.
So that collection is an effort to figure out what his connection to WikiLeaks was. It might be Jerome Corsi. Eventually, they decide maybe it's Randy Credico.
That connection to WikiLeaks has placed this man, comedian Randy Credico, at the center of the special counsel's investigation. Both Roger Stone and Assange were guests on Credico's New York radio show leading up to the 2016 election.
It's also to figure out why on August 21st, 2016, Roger Stone said it'll soon be John Podesta's time in the barrel. There is abundant evidence that by that point, Roger Stone had gotten an advance look at what WikiLeaks was going to leak in October of 2016.
John Podesta, thanks very much for joining us. In a statement to CNN, Stone said, and I'm reading it now, I am confident that Podesta most likely repeated his lie that I knew in advance about the hacking of his email, and I'm anxious to rebut this falsehood. Your reaction?
Mr. Stone's relationship to the truth is about as good as President Trump's. And, he's threatened to sue me. And I think, send the process servers because we'll see who wins in court.
And that was a big part of the investigation. In May of 2018, the FBI interviews a guy named Andrew Miller,
a close associate of Trump's former advisor, Roger Stone, who dodged the Mueller grand jury last week. Miller was an assistant to Stone in 2016.
Roger Stone operates with all these hangers-on who do little jobs for him. Many of them are militia members. They get paid small amount of money because they do little jobs. Then there's the madam who set up Elliot Spitzer. She's always a key fixture.
I speak to Roger Stone every day.
She, by the way, has a key role in the Bobby Kennedy campaign, although she claims to have split with Roger Stone. Who knows? But in May of 2018, the FBI interviews this guy, Andrew Miller. They know that Roger Stone figured out that the DNC drop was coming before the RNC. So they have to figure out how he learned that. And they interview this guy, Andrew Miller, who was staffing Stone at the convention, and they figure out how. We don't know how, but they figure out how. Basically, they ask Miller about somebody. He's, I don't know him under that name. I know him under a different name. And they've got a smoking gun. But then immediately after that, they learn by getting a pen register on Roger Stone that immediately after that interview, he tells Roger Stone tells him to stall. Roger Stone panics when he figures out that Andrew Miller has been interviewed, and panics when he figures out that Andrew Miller has told certain things to the FBI. And so starting around that period, they begin to investigate Roger Stone for obstruction of the investigation, in addition to the what's your tie to WikiLeaks. I've said this before. One of the things the FBI found substantial amount of evidence for is that both before the DC leaks and the Guccifer 2.0 persona went public, Roger Stone knew about it. And they found that because in the entire country, the only people who were searching on those things was a phone that seemed to be Roger Stone's. Because they didn't investigate this until years after the fact, they couldn't tie it directly to the phone. And so one of the things the FBI was doing in this period was trying to collect every single IP address ever associated with Roger Stone. In fact, one of the things that they searched on was his Craigslist swinger account, because that's stuff that is really Roger Stone, not one of his potential aides.
Why has he chosen the dirty trickster, the flamboyant persona that he's chosen?
He was in many ways forced to, because he was running Bob Dole's campaign back in the 90s, which was a God and Country campaign. And then he was outed for being a swinger. He and his wife were looking for young men or couples, no fatties, to swing with them. And of course, at first he said it was an FBI conspiracy and blamed his drug-addicted maid, and then later admitted it was true.
So they got his swinger account on Craigslist to figure out what devices Roger Stone is accessing. It was a really fun investigation. In this time period, so July, August, September of 2018, they are actively investigating whether Roger Stone is an agent of Russia. Much of this is not public. The affidavits for Roger Stone's investigation were released in April of 2020, and much of what I'm going to describe right now, those affidavits were still sealed, largely sealed in April 2020, because the investigation was ongoing before Barr killed the investigation. One of the things that's interesting is, for the first time in the Roger Stone investigation, you have an agent from Pittsburgh, right? Pittsburgh is where some of the most important cybersecurity, Pittsburgh is where the hack and leak investigation started. And so you've got an agent from Pittsburgh writing affidavits for an investigation into Roger Stone. This is a new development in August and September of 2018. This is stuff that Roger Stone was not given discovery on. This is stuff that is separate from the charges against him. So what they decide, remember, this is when they're trying to flip Jerome Corsi.
What I told the special prosecutor was I thought I was giving Roger a cover story. In other words, I was allowing him to have an alternative explanation for why he said the Podesta is going to be in the barrel based on my research on Podesta.
So he asks Corsi to give him a cover story. Give him a cover story for his public comment that it'll soon be John Podesta's time in the barrel. And then in 2017, they make a further effort to retroactively give Roger Stone a cover story for that time in the barrel comment. And had Corsi actually cooperated, that would have been the main substance of what he would have had against Roger Stone, which is that immediately after Roger Stone says that publicly, he and Corsi turn to creating a false cover story about how he knew about the Podesta files in August of 2016.
So you were telling him that he could use this story even if it wasn't true.
Absolutely. The court papers also show Mueller sent Corsi a draft plea agreement. It stipulated that the special counsel would not oppose Corsi requesting a sentence of probation if he agreed to plead guilty to one count of lying to federal investigators. As NBC News has reported, Corsi says he rejected the deal.
There's what I argue is an enormous head fake in the Mueller report. There's this belief, right? Everyone believes that the WikiLeaks dropped the John Podesta files on October 7th, 2016 to cover up the Access Hollywood video. Remember? Right?
I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
The other thing that happens that same day, though, is the attribution to Russia.
In the day's other news, the United States formally charged that Russia organized the hacking of democratic political sites and state election systems.
And it is my belief that, in fact, WikiLeaks dropped it on October 7th, 2016, because of the attribution to Russia, and they learned about it via Roger Stone. So they learned the attribution's coming, and they drop it to drown out that attribution.
The Department of Homeland Security and the Director of National Intelligence said it is an effort to interfere with the election process.
That doesn't mean the Access Hollywood isn't the same, but the Jerome Corsi stuff focuses on that. Did they know? Did they control the timing of that release?
Corsi says he didn't have advanced knowledge, despite what those emails
I was going to
show.
say, how does he explain those emails? Because those are very explicit.
They are explicit.
And specific.
He says he read the July 22nd email dump, the first DNC email dump, noticed that there were very few John Podesta emails in that load of emails, and deduced that the October surprise was going to be John Podesta's email.
I'm seeing a lot of skepticism on faces around this table.
I looked at him and prosecutors were extremely skeptical as well. And he told me they were essentially laughing at him. Jeannie Rhee, one of the prosecutors, said, so you're telling me that you were on a plane going to Italy with your wife for your 25th anniversary, and God just told you that this is what happened? And he said, yes.
But if you look at the Mueller report, and I've written this up, I love it, frankly. If you look at the Mueller report, they start by asking the question, did Roger Stone control the timing of the John Podesta release? And in the Mueller report, they only answer, Jerome Corsi did not. Did Roger Stone? Jerome Corsi did not. They don't actually answer the question. There are a number of gaps in the Mueller report where they seem to decline a prosecution, but they actually don't answer the question. So, for example, when Mueller makes the declination on conspiracy, he does it by section. And he says none of the outreaches from Russia in section whatever it is amount to conspiracy. None of the Russian agent stuff in this other section amount to conspiracy. But he just doesn't mention the section on the hack and leak. So he actually doesn't decline prosecution for Roger Stone on the hack and leak. And as I've said, there's a footnote that was not released until literally the evening of the 2020 election that shows that the investigation into whether Roger Stone was part of the hack and leak was ongoing until Bill Barr killed it. And how Bill Barr killed it is a very good question.
President Trump is testing the independence of the Justice Department, thanking his own attorney general for taking charge of the case of his longtime friend Roger Stone in an attempt to keep him out of jail.
Fall of 2018, you've got still secret activity involving Pittsburgh, run, of course, by Scott Brady, who's one of the hackiest, one of the most Trumpiest U.S. attorneys.
Thank you. I'm Scott Brady. I'm the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania.
Into whether Roger Stone is an agent of Russia. It's the scope of investigation that he may not know about to this day. That's all stuff that they do before the election. And there's almost this feeling like they know that after the election, things may go south.
President Trump has sought no assurances, promises, or commitments from me of any kind, either express or implied, and I have not given him any, other than that I would run the department with professionalism and integrity.
So there's this big rush to get all of this done before the 2018 election. And then in November of 2018, they get a lead. And the lead is that Roger Stone has a notebook that he has written down all of his conversations with Donald Trump over the course of 2016. So in other words, it's a CYA file. Roger Stone has kept receipts so that he has something over Donald Trump.
Jared Kushner has an IQ of 70. He's coming to Miami. We will eject him from Miami very quickly. He'll be leaving very quickly. He has 100 security guards. I'll have 5,000 security guards. You want to fight? Let's fight. Fuck you. Fuck you and your abortionist bitch daughter.
They discover that around Thanksgiving of 2018. Let me take a step back and talk about what happened with Steve Bannon. They flipped Mike Flynn. And one of the people that Mike Flynn probably told about the sanctions discussions with Russia was Steve Bannon. I talked about in the past how Trump basically scripted Steve Bannon to tell Hipsy that he didn't have a discussion about sanctions.
It's a limited hangout.
It's a limited hangout.
It's a modified limited hangout.
Steve Bannon knew about the sanctions discussion. Steve Bannon also knew about the meeting in the Emirates. So Mueller interviews Steve Bannon in 3 sets of periods, 4 actually. The first is in February of 2018. Remember, Bannon's on the outs with Trump because of the Michael Wolff book. He said things like, yeah, it was collusion for Don Jr. to meet Aguilar.
Bannon says, even if you thought that this was not treasonous or unpatriotic or bad blank, and I happen to think it's all of that, You should have called the FBI immediately.
So Mueller has 2 super long interviews with Steve Bannon, and Bannon lies his ass off, just lies and lies. And then in October of 2018, he does a second interview with Bannon, and he has receipts on Bannon at this point. He has receipts about the conversations he had with Roger Stone. Paul Manafort is allegedly cooperating. So in that interview, Bannon comes much closer to telling the truth about Roger Stone.
Bannon didn't only say that the Trump campaign was receiving what it thought was inside information on WikiLeaks from Roger Stone. He also suggested that they believed that that Stone was sort of orchestrating the release of the stolen Democratic emails.
Over the course of this, Mueller learns that in December of 2016, in the transition, Trump goes to Bannon and says, Steve, Roger Stone's coming over here, and I don't want to talk to him. I want you to attend the meeting, and I want you to kick Roger Stone out. So this happens in early December of 2018. Bannon described that Stone brought a folder of something. So there's very good reason to believe that CYA file I've just described, these notes of all the conversations Roger Stone had with Donald Trump over the course of 2016, that he brought it to that meeting in Trump Tower in December of 2016. Bannon described that Trump sat there with his arms crossed through the whole meeting, and sure enough, Bannon got rid of Stone minutes into the meeting.
What kind of advice are you giving the president-elect?
That would be proprietary, because any conversation I have with him must remain private.
Remember, Stone is already trying to pardon Julian Assange in this period. And that is actually the more interesting substance of the Randy Credico stuff, is no later than November 15th, Roger Stone is working with a key WikiLeaks lawyer to talk about a pardon for Julian Assange.
I now believe he learned that from a woman friend of his who was a lawyer for WikiLeaks for over 30 years.
Right.
I was reluctant to give his name to the committee.
And Roger Stone is actually working on that. So June of 2017, before he's a subject of the investigation, he's DMing, what a fucking moron. He is DMing Julian Assange on Twitter saying, I'm working with the highest level of government to get you a pardon. This is after the Vault 7 stuff, after the most devastating leak from WikiLeaks.
Though many of the tools detailed in the documents are the kind of things you'd expect from an intelligence agency, they provide an unprecedented blueprint for how the CIA could hack individuals they're spying on.
Roger Stone is still working a pardon, presumably with Donald Trump. And he's saying, I'm going to shut the whole thing down. So when you learn from Jeannie Rhee and Andrew Weissman that there was no hack and leak investigation when they asked about it in June and July of 2017, you have to ask whether Roger Stone was actually successful in shutting down the investigation that would have led to Julian Assange. And it's a very good question. Steve Bannon begins to tell the truth. Bannon does grand jury testimony in January of 2019, a week before Roger Stone is indicted. And whatever he said in that grand jury was much closer to the truth. And when Roger Stone got it, he was furious.
You can report all you fucking want, you'll find nothing.
He believed that Bannon had sold him out. It caused a split between Bannon and Roger Stone for years. You can see that Roger Stone goes on, I want to say Hannity, goes on all these Fox shows talking about, and probably also Alex Jones, and talks about what a sellout Bannon is.
It's a stunning act of betrayal.
Whatever Stone gets in discovery about what Bannon said to the grand jury, he's furious about it. And one of the things Bannon would have been asked about is that meeting in December of 2016. And then, as I said, Roger Stone is indicted in January of 2019. He's got 2 properties in New York. He's got a property in Florida. They arrest him. They search all 3 properties at once. That search is for those notes about the conversations with Donald Trump and also his phones. That's the first that they get, his phones. Those phones show certain things about Randy Credico. I think Randy Credico and Roger Stone likely were discussing the Julian Assange pardon starting on October 3rd, 2016. So when you talk about the timing of the October 7th, 2016 release, and you talk about the fact that Roger Stone met with Trump or spoke to Trump both on October 6th and October 8th, it is not unreasonable to imagine there was a quid pro quo for Julian Assange, that there was an understanding with WikiLeaks that he would get a pardon by releasing those files. So I told you Andrew Miller, interviewed in May of 2018. Roger Stone immediately starts obstructing the investigation. Mueller releases the report in March of 2019. No conspiracy.
After finding no underlying collusion with Russia, the special counsel's report goes on to consider whether certain actions of the president could amount to obstruction of the special counsel's investigation. The special counsel did not make a traditional prosecutorial judgment regarding this allegation. Instead, the report recounts 10 episodes involving the president and discusses potential legal theories for connecting those activities to the elements of an obstruction offense.
Mueller is still working on two things, and one is these subpoenas of the Egyptian bank, right? So that's still in the process, and they don't get those subpoenas answered until afterwards. So he's keeping the office open for that. And also for Andrew Miller, because Andrew Miller challenges the subpoena from Mueller all the way to the Supreme Court at the moment when Mueller is giving his press conference to end the investigation.
I will close by reiterating the central allegation of our indictments, that there were multiple, systematic efforts to interfere in our election. And that allegation deserves the attention of every American.
One of the last things Mueller did was to get Andrew Miller's testimony. And I can't prove what I'm about to describe, but one of the first things they did, this we know, after getting his testimony indicting Roger Stone, was to give Andrew Miller a new subpoena, a trial subpoena. And he comes to the trial and stays over the weekend, but never testifies. And so the trial was a trial to put Roger Stone in prison, and they succeeded in showing that he lied to cover up what his real ties to Russia were, which, by the way, weren't WikiLeaks.
Assange himself has said Stone is a clever spinmeister, but we've never had any contacts with him.
If you look at the interview reports in the documents that have been released, there is somebody who was interviewed over the weekend at trial. This is November of 2019. My suspicion is it was Miller. My suspicion is they used this trial subpoena to get him to come and sit for an interview to ask him further questions. And that's interesting because after that weekend, after that interview, they bring the FBI agent back, and she doesn't know the substance of the later investigation into Roger Stone. She's the main agent for the obstruction. They bring her back and they get her on the record about Guccifer 2.0. This is not something they needed for the case. It's something they needed in the record, possibly to prevent Roger Stone from launching a new defense, possibly to reflect this witness testimony from over the weekend. So whether it was Miller or somebody else, whatever they did over the weekend, they seem to have advanced the question of who was the Guccifer 2.0 that Roger Stone was actually speaking to much, much earlier than in August 2016 when it first came out that he was. I've said this before, I'll say it again, the Mueller Report, two parts, right? You've got part two, which is the obstruction investigation. And I've said over and over again that was not meant to be a referral for prosecution. That was meant to be a referral for impeachment. Congress was meant to take that because some of the things in there, most notably Donald Trump's collusion, I'm going to use the term, Donald Trump's discussions with Vladimir Putin about how to cover up the June 9th meeting, that's not something you can prosecute, but it is something that should have been impeached.
That allegation deserves the attention of every American.
Part two is an impeachment referral. Part one is a declinations and prosecution report on why no one was charged as a Russian agent, what the charges about Manafort were, the social media campaign. Interestingly, in the social media stuff, they got Susie Wiles, who at that point was just running Trump's Florida campaign.
In the world of Florida politics, Susie Wiles is who many Republican candidates turn to so they can cross the finish line on top. She helped Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis become governor and is credited by many with helping President Trump win Florida 4 years ago.
Yevgeny Prigozhin's trolls got Susie Wiles to do IRL stuff, to respond to them as if they're real people. Now, there's no reason to believe that she did anything criminal, but Russia was going after Susie Wiles in 2016, Yevgeny Prigozhin's. And so she's the one who was targeted in this Iranian hack. She's now one of Trump's however many campaign managers. But so Susie Wiles has that history. So part one is the social media, the hack and leak, all of this outreach from Russians, right? And much of that outreach from Russians, including the Dmitry Simes stuff, is stuff that would have continued as a counterintelligence investigation after Mueller was done. So if you believe, as I do, that part two is an impeachment referral, then where Mueller got in 2019 is to the point where he can't do anything unless Trump stops interfering with the investigation. He can't do anything so long as Paul Manafort is going to lie, knowing he's going to get a pardon. He can't flip Roger Stone so long as Roger Stone is going to lie expecting a pardon.
Do you think Roger Stone's counting on a pardon?
He'll get a pardon. He'll definitely get a pardon. He's been loyal to this president for 37 years. I know the president is not loyal, doesn't reciprocate loyalty. But in this case, he really doesn't want Roger Stone yapping out there.
Which is, of course, what happened. Mueller can't get further until Trump is out of power. And so that volume was meant to be an impeachment referral to Congress. Bill Barr succeeded in thwarting any possible attempt. And frankly, Nancy Pelosi didn't do her job. Nancy Pelosi's brilliant, most important speaker in the history of Congress, arguably.
Thank you very much.
But Nancy Pelosi blew all three impeachments, not impeaching the Russian investigation, the way in which she impeached the Ukraine and the January 6th impeachment. If she had done what they did with the January 6th investigation, put the Republicans who voted for impeachment, if you put Liz Cheney on the January 6th impeachment, you have a much better chance of actually succeeding with impeachment, and Pelosi didn't do that. So I think if Mueller had had his way, you would have had impeachment, and then there would have been a follow-on investigation of Roger Stone. There was some form of clemency found in Donald Trump's desk drawer during the search of Mar-a-Lago. And that form of clemency had a classified document associated with it, stapled to it or something like that, in the desk drawer. And that document, classified secret, pertains to Emmanuel Macron.
Look, I think the more the public knows about this, the more they know about the activities of the Russian government. Also, not just here in the U.S., they did it in the French elections by dumping by both hacking and dumping emails, by production of fake news, by the distribution of fake news into the French election. It didn't work there. There are already active measures going on in the German election. This is a very serious threat to democracy.
And so my suspicion is that the investigation of whether Roger Stone was conspiring with Russia in hack and leaks included whether Stone and his associates, people like Jack Posobiec, conspired with Russia on the Macron hack and leak in 2017. The data would have been fresher at that point, for one. And in 2020, in October of 2020, Scott Brady,
U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania,
indicts the GRU for
some of the most destructive, most costly, and most egregious cyber attacks ever known.
Primarily the hack of the South Korean Olympics.
The defendants were all officers within Military Unit 74455 of the Russia Main Intelligence Directorate, also known as the GRU. Unit 74455 is well known to the Department of Justice and to the FBI for, among other things, its role in Russia's efforts to interfere in the 2016 U.S. elections.
But in there is like a throwaway indictment of the 2017 Macron hack and leak. And it says, and this is flat out bullshit, it says that the FBI was not able to figure out how the hack and leak documents got from the GRU in 2017 to being released partly by Jack Posobiec and other Roger Stone associates on Twitter. They chose not to pursue, and this is actually an interesting through line in the three GRU indictments of how did it get released. It's something that Mueller dealt with on the DNC hack and leak. It was not dealt with. It's an interesting blind spot remember there was a subsequent indictment in August or October of 2018, the same year that they did the DNC hack and leak. They say that GRU cultivated a bunch of people to release the anti-doping materials that they stole, but they don't talk about how that happened. In the 2021, where they talk about the Macron hack and leak, they just say we weren't able to figure it out. And that is not remotely credible that they were not able to figure it out. I think what happens with the Roger Stone investigation is it's not prosecuted, and it's not prosecuted under Brady. That's my suspicion. I should caveat that heavily.
In the end, Iswile was pardoned. He saw through what they were doing to me because they had never allowed me to put on any defense at all.
It's super important that I believe Mueller wanted Congress to impeach because you couldn't get further in the investigation until after they impeach. You're stuck. We talked about how in November of 2017, Rod Rosenstein no longer permitted Mueller to keep things like the Michael Cohen other crimes underneath him. That made it harder for him to flip people. He did succeed in flipping Michael Cohen, but he might have gotten better cooperation if he had been able to keep the taxi stuff and the hush payment underneath him. And by the way, the hush payment was something that Manafort allegedly lied about. By May of 2018, Congress is undermining Mike Flynn's cooperation. In February of 2019, after Barr comes in, somebody, and I think it might be Kash Patel, sent Flynn a text that basically says the Eagle has landed. And so everyone, like Flynn and Rick Gates, at a minimum, are waiting for Barr to be brought in. And they know that as soon as Barr is brought in, things are not going to go further anymore. Everyone recognized Mueller rushed to get stuff done in fall of 2018, knowing after the election that things were going to change. Right after the election, Trump fires Jeff Sessions, and therefore the recusal issue is gone. There's this holding period when big dick toilet salesman, whatever his name is, Matthew Whitaker.
I invite you now to join me in viewing the best product the new Attorney General of the United States ever helped sell the world, the extra deep masculine toilet for the well-endowed. Lord, I don't know what I did to deserve Matthew Whitaker.
I think they know that they can't do anything with Whitaker there. And so Mueller is still putting together some charges for Roger Stone. But it's super important that people understand that. The charges against Roger Stone were mostly a bookmark, basically. If you remember, they went to HPSCI in December of 2018 and said, hey, can we get your transcripts? And they basically used the Roger Stone testimony at HPSCI as an easy way to charge Roger Stone without compromising their investigation that went into whether he was a Russian agent. So they used it as a way to prosecute him without giving away the goods. Make sense? That happens sometimes, particularly when you're dealing with counterintelligence investigations. It's a cost to charge anybody because you have to give up your intelligence sources. And so what they were doing with Roger Stone was using something that was easy and wasn't that. And also, one of the things they did with the trial was they got both Credico and Margaret Kunstler. She is the WikiLeaks lawyer with whom Stone was negotiating a pardon. They got them on the record. So Randy Credico actually admits that they were discussing a pardon.
New reports tonight, he's also looking beyond collusion and into Roger Stone's alleged threats to the political activists he once described as his intermediary to WikiLeaks, Randy Credico. That may seem familiar because Credico first aired those concerns in our interview back in May. Quote, I'm going to take that dog away from you. Nothing you can do about it. I'm paraphrasing. I will prove to the world you're a liar.
He's afraid I'm going to unload on him.
Why is he, let me ask you this, why is he bringing your dog, who we have on the screen, why is he bringing your dog into this?
Because he's a sick man. He is delusional.
That's how we know a lot of this. You can see the discussions in, Margaret Kunstler was interviewed twice by Mueller's people. But the story between Roger Stone and WikiLeaks is not about getting access to the files earlier. He got access to the files earlier via some other means. What the story between Roger Stone and WikiLeaks was Roger Stone agreeing to get a pardon for Julian Assange.
Prior to becoming president, well before he even ran in 2016, Trump was very harsh in his assessment of whistleblowers like Edward Snowden. and Julian Assange. He had, I remember very clearly during the Snowden reporting, said he thought Snowden was a traitor who deserved to be executed. He had said similar things about Julian Assange. And so Trump clearly had a change of heart. He often praised Julian Assange during the 2016 campaign as a hero when Assange was doing the reporting that Hillary Clinton believes was, along with Jim Comey, the primary reason she lost.
And he was still pushing it. It was still going until 2018. And then I think what happened was, remember, Mueller tries to interview Don Jr. with the grand jury, and Don Jr. says he didn't book the 5th. So that's one of the reasons Don Jr.'s investigation into the January 9th stuff couldn't go further, because he refused to testify to the grand jury.
But are you scared that you could go to jail?
I'm not, because I know what I did, and I'm not worried about any of that. You know, that doesn't mean they won't try to create something. I mean, we've seen that happen with everything. But, you know, again, I'm not.
There was an extended discussion about whether Trump would sit for the grand jury. Inexplicably, even the National Security, the Assistant Attorney General for National Security, was involved in these discussions. Shouldn't have been. Got opinions about why that's true, but there was a big effort by everybody at DOJ to find a way to prevent Trump from being interviewed by the grand jury.
Did the president refuse a request to be interviewed by you and your team?
Yes.
Yes. And is it true that you tried for more than a year to secure an interview with the president?
Yes.
And is it true that you and your team advised the president's lawyer that, quote, an interview with the president is vital to our investigation, close quote?
Yes.
And is it true that you also quote, stated that it is in the interest of the presidency and the public for an interview to take place, close quote?
Yes.
But the president still refused to sit for an interview by you or your team?
True. True.
And so Mueller gives him a set of questions.
And did you also ask him to provide written answers to questions on the 10 possible episodes of obstruction of justice crimes involving him?
Yes.
Did he provide any answers to a single question about whether he engaged in obstruction of justice crimes?
I would have to check on that. I'm not certain.
And Trump gives the questions back, doesn't answer anything. But those questions includes, are you in discussions about getting Julian Assange a pardon before you were president? And around the time that Donald Trump gets those questions, Arthur Schwartz and Rick Grinnell. So Rick Grinnell at the time is the acting intelligence chief. Arthur Schwartz is head of one of the big Trump PACs and super close buddies with Don Jr. They're part of this right-wing listserv that Cassandra Fairbanks is also on. Cassandra Fairbanks is somebody that Guccifer 2.0 reached out to. Cassandra Fairbanks became very close to Julian Assange.
I think that in a just world, there would be a holiday dedicated to him and his efforts. And I think that it's absolutely horrifying that this man has been sitting in an embassy for 6 years for the crime of doing journalism.
So she was on this listserv, always pushing them for a pardon for Julian Assange. Cassandra Fairbanks was investigated. She worked for Sputnik for a while. Not investigated as a Russian agent, but they were like, what is her relationship with Sputnik? It's a similar kind of investigation that you're seeing now with the Dimitri Simes stuff.
The FBI has raided the homes of 2 Americans, both of whom have ties to Russian state media. Scott Ritter, a former United Nations weapons inspector and critic of U.S. foreign policy, had his New York residence searched on August 7th. And Dimitri Sims, a Soviet-born U.S. citizen.
And around the time that Donald Trump gets those questions, that shows that Mueller knows about the pardon for Assange. I forget whether it was Grinnell or Schwartz. Tell Cassandra, there's no fucking way he's getting a pardon. The pardon deal is off. Not going to happen. And my suspicion is that the reason the pardon deal was off was not that Vault 7 made it impossible at all. Donald Trump was still going to pardon. He's still very seriously considered pardoning Julian Assange even after Vault 7, even after they had more reason to believe that he was working with Russia the whole time. But the reason the pardon was off was because Mueller acquired evidence that there was this possible quid pro quo, this understanding that Trump would have to agree to a pardon before the John Podesta files would get released. Now, I can't prove that. I can prove that the pardon discussion starts no later than November 15th. but I have posted long conversations I had with Randy Credico about whether it happened on November 9th, whether it started in October, and he refuses to answer those. He absolutely refuses to answer. But we know that on October 3rd, 2016, Credico says, my best friend is Assange's lawyer. And that's where Credico says, can't you get Trump to pardon him? That's where this pardon discussion starts from. And so it starts before the October 7th release of the John Podesta emails. I haven't gotten now. And then the other interesting thing about this is both Stone and Credico claim to have lost the text where they had this conversation. Credico deleted his. When Credico was subpoenaed for them, Credico honestly said, I deleted it before you gave me a subpoena. Roger Stone was subpoenaed for them because Roger Stone, again, running his mouth, he went to Chuck Ross, then at the Daily Caller, and said, hey, Chuck, I've got proof of what my conversations with Randy Credico were. And after he did that, Mueller went to Stone and said, oh, give me those texts. And so that's how he got those texts. And we saw some of them at the trial, but not what happened after that October 3rd, 2016 conversation about a pardon. All of those are in government custody, but they were not released to trial. On May 4th or 5th.
Raise your hand if you predicted this a year ago. 323 days ago, Donald Trump rode down the escalator here at Trump Tower to announce he was running for president, a candidacy that many across the country, political analysts, members of the media, and his opponents didn't think stood a chance. But with Cruz and Kasich now out, Trump is the Republican Party's presumptive nominee for president. It's a remarkable moment in American political history.
So this is right after Trump has sealed up the nomination. All of these outreaches start again. Kilimnik meets with Manafort. There is an effort very early on to pitch Roger Stone on dirt about Hillary Clinton from a Russian guy who happens to be an FBI informant. That same day, Felix Sater reaches out to Cohen and says, get on a plane, go to St. Petersburg for this thing in June. So everything starts in May of 2016. And it's going to go forward. There's going to be this quid pro quo where Trump agrees for sanctions relief. He gets his tower in Moscow. Everything goes swimmingly. And I've said that I believe there was going to be a cover story for the release of the stolen documents.
Cohen said today he did talk with the Trump campaign officials about going to Russia and even suggested that Mr. Trump could go there to pursue the project after becoming the Republican Party's nominee for president in mid-July. Cohen said today the deal was abandoned June 14th, which is the same day the Washington Post reported that Russians hacked into Democratic computers.
But then when the DNC attributes the hack and leak to Russia on June 14th, 2016, that screws up everything. June 9th, right before June 14th, June 9th, they go in and say, if we gave you dirt on Hillary Clinton, would you give us sanctions relief? And Don Jr. says, we'll talk about it later. Then on June 14th, they get dirt on Hillary Clinton. The DNC immediately attributes it to Russia. If they had not immediately attributed it to Russia, it would have all continued on without us knowing about it. Then Michael Cohen testified that the Trump Tower meetings continued at least through July. Rudy Giuliani seems to have said that they continued at least until the election.
Okay.
Well, it's our understanding that they went on throughout 2016. Weren't a lot of them, but there were conversations. Can't be sure of the exact dates, but the president can remember having conversations with him about it.
Throughout 2016?
The president also remembered. Yeah, probably could be up to as far as October, November. Our answers cover until the election. So anytime during that period, they could have talked about it.
This is why I'm so obsessed about the Trump Towers in Jeddah, right? Because it's the same currency.
Dar Global and the U.S. Trump Organization have announced plans to launch a Trump Tower in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The project marks Trump Organization's first collaboration in Saudi Arabia.
You bribed Donald Trump by giving him a Trump Tower deal. This is free money for him. Russia was going to give Trump a Trump Tower. They were going to help Trump, which they did. They told George Papadopoulos ahead of time that they were going to do it. The Sisi report says it's not credible that he didn't tell the campaign, right? He told his boss on the campaign and then just decided not to testify about that. In Mike Flynn's sentencing stuff, and this is why it's so important to try and overturn Mike Flynn's prosecution. In Mike Flynn's sentencing, they're like, it was really important to find out whether these conversations were the quo of a quid pro quo, whether this sanction relief discussion was the payoff for the help of getting elected, right? Through the entire period, it's sanctions for help getting elected. It's carve up Ukraine for help getting elected. For Roger Stone, it's pardon Julian Assange for help getting elected. Mike Flynn testified that Trump was part of these conversations. Bannon may have in that grand jury appearance. I don't know. And I don't know whether they know. In other words, Stone would only have gotten the grand jury stuff that pertained to him. So they may have asked Bannon about the sanctions. But had Bannon admitted they all knew about the sanctions, had they admitted they knew about the sanctions when they sent Prince to the Seychelles to have these discussions, then you have this dance, this conversation where quid pro quo, like one after another, offer sanctions relief, Ukraine, in exchange for help getting elected. And there's abundant reason to believe that it happened, but Mueller was not able to pursue the investigation. And again, I keep saying this, but Mueller Volume 2 is meant to be an impeachment inquiry, an impeachment referral. Because if you impeach Donald Trump, then you can continue the investigation into what happened. You can't continue it unless you impeach Donald Trump. And that's one reason why Barr's effort to prevent that from happening is so important, why the effort by Congress to undermine the claims about Russian collusion are so important, because had that impeachment succeeded, had the investigation gone forward, then maybe you do get Paul Manafort to admit that at that August 2nd meeting, there was an explicit quid pro quo. Roger Stone has said publicly, and you will find these, Roger Stone has said prosecutors offered to go easy on him if he would testify about all those conversations.
On July 24th of 2019, one of the prosecutors approached my lawyers and proposed essentially a deal. If your client would be willing to come clean, if your client would be prepared to confess that these 29 phone calls between himself and candidate Donald Trump in 2016 were about WikiLeaks and the Russians, we might be willing to recommend no jail time.
Okay, so what you're saying is ultimately that you were offered a deal to implicate Donald Trump. If you come along and say the president of the United States is even in any way connected to all of this, then that's how Roger Stone goes free.
That's exactly right.
We don't know whether they found the notebook of all the conversations, but if he would testify all the conversations he had with Donald Trump. The Washington Post has said, and they're the only ones who said this, but it's completely consistent with what I've just argued, that Trump was not just, Maggie Haberman would have you believe that Trump was only investigated for obstruction. That's false. Obviously, there's the Egyptian bank, but the Washington Post has reported that he was also investigated for conspiracy and CFAA violations.
So accessing data that's not yours in various forms, infecting computers with malicious software, trafficking in passwords that allow others to gain access to computers that are protected. All those things are covered under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act that we have in the United States.
The reason why he was investigated for conspiracy and CFAA violations was because of Roger Stone. They were going to get to him through Roger Stone, through the ongoing investigation to Roger Stone CFA. That is the significance of the fact that the investigation of Roger Stone was still open, Mueller. That is the significance of the fact of Barr's killing the Roger Stone stuff. If you get to Roger Stone, you get to Donald Trump. That is the significance of the pardon in the desk drawer that seems to pertain to Emmanuel Macron and possibly not to Russia. It's possibly not the pardon we know about. That is where this could have gone and did not go through Bill Barr's intervention.
Thanks for listening to Ball of Thread. Expect a new episode about every 2 weeks until the election. To support this series and get answers to your questions with a bonus Q&A podcast, go to patreon.com/balloffthread. You can join us for as little as $1 a month. We appreciate your sharing this work with anyone who cares about the Constitution, and please consider giving us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts.